Alright, so this past week I went to Dresden with my study abroad group. And, as is normal, when I go somewhere, I'm going to talk about what I saw there. Now, I'm not going to talk about things chronologically, but rather in an order that makes more sense narratively, so I have time to talk about the things that I want to talk about. So if you see the sunlight kind of jumping around, that's why. But nevertheless, starting from Berlin, we took the train to Dresden, got off the train, left the train station, walked down to the square, where we saw these kind of weird metal balls, that almost looked like plasma globes. And then on the other side of the square, we saw this weird monument statue thing. I don't exactly know what they are. They're old communist monuments that they left, so I don't really know the meaning. But this here is in this large square, where they'll have a big Christmas festival, which of course I didn't see because I wasn't here for Christmas, but it's supposed to kind of be like just huge and celebratory and kind of has traditional Dresden things, like these little wooden statues which were all made here in Dresden. This is then an old fountain, I think, and across the road there is this palace. Well, I mean, it's called a palace, but it's not really a palace. It's more just a walled-in courtyard, I guess, and was built for a wedding at some point in the past, but right now it houses a bunch of museums inside the various buildings. Then coming up, there is this concert hall, which I believe Richard Wagner played in, but don't quote me on that. And then there's more of an actual palace or castle, I'm not exactly sure. In fact, that's actually kind of happens a lot with Dresden, or I guess Europe in general, is they have a bunch of old historical stuff, like this statue here, which I can tell is important, but I don't know what it means. Like, there's so much historical monuments and structures and things like that, that it becomes hard to learn the meaning of everything. And perhaps it is my fault for not taking the time to learn the history of it, but when you're only there for part of a day, you don't really have time to learn all the history of everything, so it kind of all just blends together into a bunch of old stuff. And in many ways it's kind of interesting, because these people want to be remembered, so they'll build the things, but it all just kind of blends together and you don't really remember it. Then again, we do remember them better than the people who don't have anything at all. This that you're seeing right now is actually kind of interesting. It was this dome that they used to cover part of that castle to make it warm there. Just thought that's kind of interesting. That on the left used to be a stable, and on the opposite side of it is this mural to a bunch of famous artists and scientists, I believe. And then these four statues represent the various times of the day. And then this is the Lieb, I believe that's how you pronounce it, river, which is the main river that runs through Dresden. And then this bridge here needs some repairs because it's kind of having a net to hold it up. But then as we go over the skyline, I'm going to talk about some general history of Dresden. So Dresden was originally a kingdom, independent of whatever government was going on in Germany at the time, until they were eventually absorbed by Prussia, I believe, in the 1800s. And Dresden was generally kind of unhappy about that, because they lost a lot of their power and authority. That is until the Nazis came around and promised them more of that power and authority. So they became immediate supporters of Hitler, because he pretty much promised to make them great again. And in fact, they were long-time supporters of Nazis pretty much right up until their surrender, at which point they were then set off into East Germany. Now, communism generally isn't known for their tolerance, so there's still even some kind of latent racism and general anti-immigrant mentality. This is a statue of August the Strong, an emperor of Poland who was born in Dresden and kind of full of himself because he's got a gold statue. This is a bell, don't know what it's meaning, but it's kind of interesting. These then upright buses are supposed to represent a connection between the Berlin Wall and the general sectioning between the East and West, and the Syrian Civil War, specifically, I'm forgetting the name, I think it's Apello, but a battle somewhere where they had upright buses and needed them, so it's kind of supposed to show the similarities. That statue was of Martin Luther, who pretty much started Protestantism, and this is a church where I don't think he nailed his 95 Theses, but it might have been. It was nevertheless pretty much completely destroyed in the bombing. Like this here is the old topper that, used to be on top of the church, but it was significantly bombed out. However, they did take the time to pretty much completely restore it using like computer analysis software to figure out where everything goes, and they did a really good job. Like this mural, or really even, as you could call it, a sculpture at the front there is very impressive. But it was pretty much completely bombed out. They did try to use as many bricks from the original structure as they could, which is what these black bricks are seeing here. But after the bombing, it was pretty much just 2 pillars. And this is part of the pillar you can see here. And it stayed that way pretty much until 1993. If you want to get an idea of what it was like, just look up Dresden Church. There will be pictures of it. So for 5 decades, though, it was just these 2 pillars, because, the communists didn't rebuild it. They're not exactly pro-religion. But at one point, we did end up taking the tram over to this museum built out of this old bombed-out natural gas tank. Not that, there was another one right across from it, where it was actually built. And it's kind of just a museum to the bombing of Dresden, and it talked about kind of what life was like in the 30s, on how Hitler rose to power, and some of the various things the Nazis did. Not just the Holocaust, but like book burnings, and stealing a bunch of famous artworks, and paintings. And of course, it also talked about the road to war, both some of the general events that led up to it, some of the maneuvers, and of course then some of the conflicts once the war began, what each side was doing, land battles, and of course the bombings. Now the bombings weren't done just by the Nazis. Both sides pretty much bombed the crap out of each other, because it was just kind of the method of warfare there. But they bombed out a lot of cities like Minsk, Belgrade, Guernica, Cologne, Hamburg, Berlin, Warsaw, London, Rotterdam, Stalingrad, Leningrad, Coventry, Walloon, Leipzig, and of course Dresden. And this here is actually the main exhibit of the museum. It's this 360-degree panorama, I guess you could call it, of just what it was like in Dresden after the bombing, because Dresden was pretty much bombed flat. Like, it was told that there was really nothing left. So, an artist kind of reconstructed this from old pictures and tried to create this to give you an idea of what it would have been like after the bombing. And you can actually look at the whole panorama in this kind of watchtower thing that's in the center. So you climb up to the top and just take a look around. And this is a bell that was in Dresden at the time of the bombing. But what's really cool is occasionally they'll turn on the lights and give you an idea of what the bombing would have been like. So yeah, it starts out all quiet and dark, and then all of a sudden a flash as the bombs start dropping. Almost like lightning, but far, far worse. And the bombings continue for a while until they eventually stop, and the city starts to glow red from the fires. And you can just see around actually quite well, just in a red tint. Now, it's interesting that they're actually able to do this, because the panorama is not a painting, it's actually a projection, so they can kind of simulate the bombings in this way, which, I think from a technical standpoint is pretty cool. And then, of course, there's the second round of bombings, because you can't have just one, you want to make sure you got it done. But yeah, so they were able to do this to just give you just an even better idea of what it would have been like to be in Dresden during the bombings. They also have these 4 pictures to show what Dresden was like in the 30s, immediately after the bombing, when it was part of the Soviet Union, and then modern times. And now, while this museum was generally to the Dresden bombing, it was also to conflict in general. Like, this here is a list of wars that have happened since World War II. Just to show the conflict. But after that, we went back through that large square where the Christmas festival is, and then we eventually stopped in a very modern mall to warm up. But after that, we got back on the train and headed home. But the mall's kind of interesting because it's very modern, and they actually wouldn't have been able to build it without the bombings. Like, the bombings opened up space for it to be built. So on the one hand, it's very modern and new, and in some ways actually stands out, but there's no history to it. I mean, you could find it in the US. All of the old structures, while they may all blend together, they all have a story and they have a history to them. So it's an interesting kind of like trade-off between modern and new and having a bunch of history and a story. I just find that kind of interesting. But nevertheless, that was my time in Dresden. Hope you enjoyed it, and see ya.